Hello. Welcome to the Devlog/Autopsy of Diviner, a dark fantasy turn-based dungeon crawler that I have been developing in my spare time roughly over the past year and a half. My developer tag is FieldBlitz on the Steam community forums, but my real name is Lance. I am a 3D generalist who's been working in the games industry for roughly a little over 6 years. Most of my expertise is in 3D environment workflows and characters with some decent knowledge of rigging and animation, and I have a couple of titles I've been lucky enough to be a part of that have been published to some big storefronts and under some big publisher names. I currently work full-time for a large and pretty well-known indie studio, and I like to expand my skills and work my own personal projects on the side, such as this one. I'm recording this video to share my own feelings about this project, what it was like working on it, some of the hard lessons I learned, and why I will most likely not be continuing it. So you may be wondering, just what is Diviner? A fair question. I'll probably have some gameplay playing in the background, but to catch you up to speed, here's an overview of the game. In Diviner, you play as an unknown knight, waking up in a desolate cell with the roof caved in. You move around in a first-person view, somewhat similar to old-school dungeon crawlers, but you can freely move your camera as you explore. When encountering an enemy, you are then locked into turn-based combat, where you move on a square-tile grid. Diviner has a pretty unique combat system, where your character has up to 4 weapons that you are encouraged to cycle through as you defeat an enemy. Each one has 4 skills that you can equip to it that deal damage, gain defenses, and apply status effects. The game puts a big emphasis on tempo, breaking through enemy defenses, maintaining your own defenses as you try to do this, and comboing certain skills together. Enemies can attack you in multiple groups, and many of your skills will have stronger effects depending on what direction you are facing towards an enemy. Weapons and rings also have a lot of strategic synergy, and Diviner is a very build-focused game with a lot of diversity and strategy. Maybe you want to stack oil on a single enemy, then explode them. Maybe you're trying to slowly poison the air around you and choke out your enemies. Or you're just going for a good old beatdown of a powerful iron-forged weapon, bashing in the head of whatever stands against you. In Diviner, I tried to make it so that all these strategies and more could be possible and, more importantly, viable. I had 3 goals with Diviner. To make a turn-based game that focuses on 3D environment exploration and dynamic 3D encounters. I also wanted to make a difficult and complex turn-based game that scales its difficulty based on the player's knowledge and understanding of the game's strategies. I also wanted to create a dark fantasy world with a sense of kind of hopeless survival, unkind and cruel to the player, but all the more rewarding when you conquer it. I like to think that with all 3 of these goals in mind, Diviner was able to accomplish a lot of what I set out originally, but like with any game project, some things went right and some things went wrong. So what went right? Well, on August 12th, after working on this game for over a year and a half, while working a full-time game development job, I released the demo for Diviner on Steam. It contained roughly 2 hours of content, with the player exploring the Blighted Ruins, the first level of the game. It had a boss, about 7 enemies with their own unique strategies and mechanics, and a number of weapons and gear for the player to experiment with. The demo was cold dropped. I didn't do any marketing or sharing news of it beforehand. Once I made it public, I made a few Reddit and Twitter posts, and I uploaded a trailer to YouTube. I also got very lucky, and my demo was featured on a pretty popular YouTube channel, getting over 80,000 views, which was a really huge surprise. The Steam page racked up about 2,500 wishlists over the next 2 weeks, which might not be a lot compared to games that have been marketing for a while, but given the circumstances, I was pretty happy with it. People finally started playing the demo, and I started collecting feedback the next day. Those that were able to and willing to progress further into the demo, at least 30 minutes in, had a lot of good things to say about the game. I'll be honest, even though I've been involved in game development for a while, and I've shipped several titles, I haven't really proven that the ideas I have for games are fun, and this was my first time really designing a game system, so I was even more surprised that those that were enjoying the demo were specifically enjoying the depth and complexity of Diviner. It seemed like I had hit that level of strategy that I was looking for, and players who wanted to explore all of the build variety and choices the game offered had a lot of incentive to do so. I also got a lot of compliments on the game's art, which means a lot to me, and I'm glad people liked how the game looked. I think a lot of things went right with the demo. I tried a new art workflow when developing the environments, basically focusing on using a very modular kit. In fact, I believe only 3 or 4 models in the game are bespoke, which means that they're only used for one specific instance, whereas everything else is being reused, scaled, shoved, or rotated, and this all allowed me to work really fast. I also am not a concept artist, so all of these characters and environment art I had to kind of design and imagine in 3D, and I'm pretty happy with the result despite not having a ton of internal art direction. Overall, I think I have a lot to be proud of for my first personal excursion into solo game development, but there were also things that went quite poorly as well. So what were the things that went wrong? Well, a lot of things, unfortunately. Originally, I had planned to have this demo finished all the way back in February this year. At that point, I had most of the art done, outside of a few polish notes and some more music tracks that needed to be written, but it looked like I was on track to have the demo done in February. However, I hadn't played the game since a prototype version I had made about 6 months prior. So I tested the game, and it was not fun at all. In fact, it was pretty miserable. The average combat encounter would take over 5 minutes, and due to how I had designed the combat flow back then, the player might spend upwards of 30 seconds just watching multiple enemies wail on them. It was uninteractive, needlessly complicated, and frankly boring. I would end up overhauling most of the game's systems, a total of 3 times, until I finally found something that felt good to play. Luckily, none of this required any art or level design changes, but I had to program and test a lot of new mechanics to replace the ones that had come before, and a few months were sunk into these efforts. You know, looking back on it, I think that what had happened was the original prototype I had made seemed very fun at the time, but I have a feeling it was really only fun for me, the developer. Getting to see the logic you put into your game work and run and operate the way you expect it to is so exciting, you kind of just get caught up in it, and you aren't able to look past it to analyze if the gameplay is actually fun for the average player. The design overhaul was the least of my worries though, as by this point I was testing a lot more often, roughly every 2 days, while implementing new features and overhauling systems. I started encountering a significant amount of bugs, many of which were game-breaking. I didn't mention it before, but I am still a somewhat novice programmer. I have some basic knowledge of debugging, but that knowledge was pretty quickly strained against some of these more core issues, and I would end up taking days, if not a week, to fix more than a few of these issues. I'd estimate I spent roughly 4 months bug fixing and hunting down prevailing issues in Diviner, and that cost me in other areas as well. Since I work as a game artist for a larger studio, I am a lot more familiar with optimizing game art at large levels. Ironically enough, Diviner's performance in the demo was pretty poor. Not unplayable, but stuttering and suffering from FPS drops on certain machines and at certain higher settings. A lot of the reasons that play into why the demo's performance was so poor were an incredibly high number of draw calls and lack of proper zoning. 2 things that I'm more than equipped to fix. In fact, I was working on a blueprint to manage turning a lot of the loosely placed static meshes into instance or HLODs, but the debugging ate into my entire optimization time budget. There isn't much point in making a broken game run faster, so I focused on fixing the game while doing some basic optimization. I still did manage to have some basic zoning in place and other features like LODs and occlusion culling and texture groups, but this was another issue that plagued the demo for players. Lastly, and probably the biggest blow to the demo's success, despite all of the time I put into testing and fixing a lot of the game's bugs, on releasing the demo there were several game-breaking bugs still inside of the demo. easily reproducible as well. Some of them could even be solved with just a Boolean check here or a widget checkbox there, yet somehow they'd escape my exhaustive testing. It was honestly pretty demoralizing, and it goes to show that I still have a lot to learn about game architecture and understanding how to properly code a game. All of these issues ultimately compounded into affecting the experience for players who were playing the demo. More often than not, players would usually stop at around the 10 to 12 minute mark, which is not super ideal. Ideally, you want players to get to at least 20 or 30 minutes. I think that a lot of players started picking up the game, either realized it wasn't for them, but more than likely, they would run into a game-breaking bug or be confused by the tutorial and the onboarding, and all of these issues compounded into a frustrating demo experience for players. And the average playtime for the demo was 12 minutes, which is significantly lower than you want to have for an average playtime, with most players stopping after playing for 5 minutes. The one silver lining is that players who got past the 30-minute mark, as mentioned before, would often play for 2 to 4 hours, which shows that all the bugs that were left in and the poor explanation of the game's mechanics in the tutorial prevented a lot of players from enjoying what should have been a challenging but rewarding game. All of this brings me to the future of Diviner. Currently, the game still has over 2,500 wish lists, which is great for a demo with such little marketing. Despite all the bugs and poor onboarding that the game had, I'm still proud of what I made. I've been replying to discussions on the Steam community forum and kind of using it as a place to update players on my progress fixing bugs. And a few players have been pretty vocal about how much they like the game's systems and how much they enjoyed playing through the whole demo, which is everything a game developer wants to hear. And I'm so happy that the demo was able to have that impact on a handful of players. After the demo had kind of unofficially wrapped up, with the average player count dropping from 15 players a day to about 1 a week, I continued on to the next step in my project timeline, which was contacting publishers. I sent my game pitch to over 20 publishers. Granted, I was very aware that my hopes of getting funded were little to none, given the size of my team is just me, and the current funding economy for games is at an all-time low. And to no surprise, the responses I've gotten back have been very kind, but also very forward projections. I won't lie, this game means a lot to me. I've become more and more attached to it as I developed it, and I wish I could share the larger story I've written for the game and all the content I would like to add to it. But this game, even its current reduced scope, would take me well over 5 to 6 years to make by myself, and without funding, it'll only be me. I also don't have enough confidence in my current programming skills to develop a game of this size and complexity. Because of all these factors, I will most likely be stopping development of the game, though I would very much like to reuse some of Diviner's game design elements in the future, as I feel like the demo proved that they can be fun. I still have some significantly smaller scoped ideas that I would like to pursue, but without an improvement in my programming skills, and without the help of a programmer, I'm most likely going to take a break from side project development just for a little bit, and focus on learning C++ fundamentals. I'm actually a bit excited even to dive a little deeper into Unreal Engine, and when I start my next project, I'm probably going to focus on a much smaller title that I can publish within a year or so. I hope this devlog/autopsy has been interesting and possibly informative to you. I hope the biggest takeaway that you get from all of this is to trust your gut instinct as a developer. If your game doesn't feel good to you, it probably won't feel good in the hands of a random player. Test and debug often, and if you're going to look for publishing as your only financial avenue, probably best to keep your budget under $500,000 until the economy improves. I tend to be very slow when it comes to sharing what I'm working on with the internet, so it may be a while to hear from me. But for any of you who played Diviner, thank you, and I hope you enjoyed it despite all of its faults. Until next time.